Thank you for joining us on the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Fathom Church in Littleton, Colorado. You will never get to the bottom of the depths that are in Christ for you. And our hope with this podcast is that it will help you go deeper with God. So let's dive into this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. What's up, everyone? This is your host, Kyle Knight, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast. Man, we hope that these conversations will help you go deeper in your relationship with God. I'm in the podcast studio with our very own missions and events minister, Karina Bost.
Hello.
Hi, Karina.
Hey.
And our senior lead pastor. I have to throw in senior
lead
pastor, Chris Martin.
No, I like
Hello,
that.
Chris.
I like that.
Do
Hey
you?
guys, first pod of the year.
Hey,
first
welcome
pod
back.
of 23.
Welcome back.
2023. This is what I want to know is in your homes, in your respective homes, or maybe we even take this to the next level and make this a generalization. When is the right time to have your Christmas decorations down by?
Okay, you guys are not going to believe this, but we have been known to take down our Christmas decorations on Christmas Day.
Wow.
On Christmas Day?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about it, like Christmas afternoon is usually kind of chill with nothing going on. And
Perfect time.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm banking on the fact that Haley doesn't listen to the podcast, but currently our Christmas decorations are still up because she didn't do Christmas with our family because she's in Thailand. And so we're surprising her with a Christmas themed birthday party when she gets back.
Aw.
And it's driving Kevin crazy that our Christmas decor is still up.
So Christmas,
That's awesome.
Christmas Day.
Christmas.
I like it. I've never heard that before. So that's cool. Okay. Kyle Knight.
Usually, I mean, we usually keep them up maybe for the next week, maybe two.
Okay.
I'll tell you this, all of our decorations are put away except for a bare tree. Because we got a new tree this year. So we need to buy like a big old
Like a bag. Yeah.
storage
Christmas tree
thing.
bag. Yeah.
So it's just sitting there.
You've
in
got
our
the winter
living room.
tree.
Yeah. Winter. I told Jackie, I was like, you could just keep this up all year round. It would just be like a plant.
A big plant with lights.
A big fake plant. Yeah. So,
Wow.
and I do have our outdoor lights still up because we have so much snow
Yeah,
and
this
ice
weekend
that I
is the
can't-
first weekend that it's nice enough, I think, to
Yeah.
get those down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
What about you?
I mean, I would take them down on the 26th.
Okay.
So I've not quite gotten to the 25th yet. I mean,
Yeah, but
I'm not that Grinch. All right. But I think turning on Christmas lights after Christmas is the dumbest thing. Like I'm driving around my neighborhood at night now, and we're recording this just so everybody knows. Today is the 12th of January.
Mhm.
I'm driving around my neighborhood 2 weeks into the new year, and there's still Christmas lights on. For what purpose? What are you
For
doing?
cheer.
Get those things back in the box. If they're still on your house, fine. Don't plug them in.
Mhm.
Yes,
kidding
ours are
me?
not on.
What
They're
are you
just
What are you
there?
like? The whole purpose of lights is anticipating Christmas,
Mhm.
like getting you set for the season. Season's over, y'all. Right? The trash has been picked up. It's gone. Get rid of them. Although mine are still up.
Well, and our HOA it just sent something out February 1st. They have to be
Gee, that's
down,
so crazy.
which is really
But
long.
and I've made this clear. I am a day after Thanksgiving putter upper, and I'm a
Mhm.
day after Christmas taker downer. I will give you a grace period till January 1st. But if you start a new calendar year, we'll throw down. We're coming to fists over it.
There you go.
Wow.
That's the line.
bunch of Grinches.
And mine
over
are still
here.
up because my wife loves them. So it's, what are you going to do?
I'm just blaming the snow.
What are you
outside
going to do? What are you
for
going
all
to do? But
Hey, so as you have seen, the topic of this episode, we're starting the year off maybe a little bit lighter, but I think this is a really good conversation to have. We're going to be talking about tipping, and Pastor Chris, tell us why you wanted to talk about tipping of all things.
Yeah. This is a weird, it feels like a curveball a little bit, but I was listening to another podcast and they were talking about tipping, and they weren't talking about it from specifically a Christian perspective, but they were, this is what they were talking about. And it kind of got me thinking. they were talking about how since COVID specifically, tipping has become a less clear thing culturally than maybe it was before. Although I would argue it was already pretty murky beforehand. Like, I don't know about you, but I went into like a gas station in the last year, maybe like a 7-Eleven or something. Walked in there. Oh, no, it was on my road trip with my family during my sabbatical this past summer. Went in there, we had filled up with gas. Marcy and Harper and myself were all using the bathrooms, doing the thing. I get like a Gatorade and like a, package of Skittles for Harper, go up to the gas station attendee, pay for my things. And with my little credit card reader thing, it asks me if I want to add a tip. And the thing says, choose A, B, C, or D. A, 20%, B, 25%, C, 30%, D, other, which I pressed and put 0 in. Okay. And then I walked away and felt like a bad person. But this is my question. When is it right to tip? When is it acceptable to tip? And then maybe even we should ask from a Christian perspective, what do we as Christ followers saying when we either do tip or don't tip? Like, is there a right or a wrong? Now, listen, we can all be clear. There's no Bible verse on this one. Okay. But I've always heard it say that Christians should be like the best tippers, right? Like, that's a way that, like, I've heard this from multiple people. Like, oh, if you're out at a restaurant or whatever, and you are praying before the meal, you better be tipping hard at the end of the meal, because you want to be generous, things like that. So, but where is the line on this thing? Like, I still think you should tip, but where shouldn't you tip? Where should you tip? How much should you? Like, I just think we should have the tipping conversation. And listen, none of this is going to be prescriptive. Okay. Most of this is going to be descriptive stuff, like describing what we think about this. Don't anybody, send us emails, or, well, feel free to send us emails. Send them to Kyle@fathomchurch.org.
There you go.
If you disagree with us, but this is just more opinion-based stuff. There's a few scriptures I think that can inform us on this topically, but let's work through the idea of tipping as Christians, especially in like a society now where everything is tip worthy, apparently, because everybody's got the little Square app and the iPad that they're going to flip around and like ask you for more money on top of what you're already spending. So that's the genesis of this topic for us.
I think a very helpful place to start is to go back to, why did tipping start in the first place?
Okay.
Like, why do we tip? And it was in service industries, most notably restaurants.
Right.
And it is worth noting, right, that restaurant workers don't actually make minimum wage from the restaurant. They get paid less, with the assumption that they are getting paid through tips as well. But also now we have it even in like hair salon. I mean, I guess the service industry as a whole. And you could, I went to get my oil changed, and they had a tip section.
Okay. So maybe let's take it. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think it starts in the service industry. There are certain occupations where you are paid less than minimum wage, and a tip is assumed as part of their compensation. Okay. But then there are also, even pre-COVID, there are also additionary salaried and or hourly paid jobs that there were tips assumed. Okay. So let's just say this. Let's just say pre-COVID, okay, pre-craziness, pre-iPads being flipped around and like Square readers and stuff. Who were you tipping? Let's just answer that question. And listen, maybe Kyle doesn't tip at all. And so
I tip.
Kyle, maybe
I tip. All right.
Code Red, you go tip at the 7-Eleven?
Tips. The 7-Eleven.
You getting your Code Red? You tip in there?
What? No.
Okay, so who have you tipped? Let's say it's 2017. You're out and about. What jobs merit a tip?
Restaurants
for sure.
Okay, so restaurants. So servers.
My hairstylist or hair cutter. What do you call them?
Yeah.
Salon workers.
I tip my barber.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I'm assuming my barber also is not making $2.13 an hour like a restaurant worker is. So that's like above whatever the salary or hourly or the $20 haircut or $25 haircut. You're tipping on top of that already. but that's still a service industry.
Well, and I think too, because a lot of like barbers, they rent their space and they are paying for the materials out of. So I think that gets a little bit more gray.
Right.
And I think that's why in that industry you tip. I also tipped, well, which is very similar. Like if I was to get my nails done, which I don't very often.
Okay. Still a service industry.
Yep, that's about it, probably.
Okay. Kyle.
And then the only other thing I could think of that kind of goes along with restaurants of delivery. Always tip your delivery.
Okay,
driver.
so yeah.
However, now there's like a delivery fee in there.
Right,
and that's on
right.
Top
So
of
you
it,
order
like,
a pizza.
Mhm.
Domino's comes out.
Someone who's driving to your house.
You're
to
tipping.
Give you
You're tipping the
That's
delivery
true, yeah.
person.
I do that as well.
See, and then this is what's confusing though, is if you're ordering a pizza and going in to pick it up,
They ask for a tip now.
they ask for a tip.
Right.
And to me, I go, well, you didn't deliver it. To me. Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry.
Now we're jumping into
But yes,
modern. But
yes.
so we can agree that there are certain
Mhm.
mostly service industry jobs that you would tip for before COVID. Okay. Did you tip a percentage? Did you tip a flat amount? Did you tip based on your experience? Did you is it a merit-based tip? So like you get a haircut and they botch that thing, right? You gonna tip?
I always tip. It's like we take the standard recommended. I don't know what's normally accepted, which I think right now is 20%. I could be wrong for restaurants. So we take that and our bills have to end in even numbers. So then we round up 20% plus some
20%
change.
plus change. Okay. Regardless.
Regardless.
What if it's an awesome experience? Do you up that tip?
Yes.
Okay.
We have been known to up a tip significantly.
So you guys are a
for-
baseline 20%er in the whatever you deem a generally acceptable service job that requires a tip. Okay. Kyle, do you do merit-based tipping or do you just kind of hit the 20?
It's something I learned this from my dad. And this is what my dad would do is he like going into a restaurant. It would start at 20%. And I mean, if it was great service, he would go up a little bit. If it wasn't that great, he would go down a little bit, but he came in at 20%. And that's kind of how, I guess, I operate. Rarely does it go below. I'm kind of like you know what? It's totally fine. Like you're serving us food and all this other kind of stuff. So usually it's 20. On rare occasions, it's higher.
All right.
For me, I'll be honest, it's mostly just however good or bad it was, you're getting 20%.
You just hit it 20%.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's also easy to do the math.
Right.
In my head.
Yeah. And so like I get the 20% thing as a baseline, especially in, restaurant context where you know that person is not making an hourly wage. They're making a lower than hourly wage with the assumption on tips. Like I get that. The secondary pieces, like the driver bringing you your pizzas. I mean, for me, I've just always thrown a driver a 5. That's just always what I've done. Now I don't know if that's right or wrong. I'm just saying like I've just always tacked $5 onto whatever I'm ordering. If it's $100 worth of Chinese food or it's $30 worth of Chinese food, I'm giving $5 to my driver because he's driving once to my house, regardless of how many bags he's bringing up to my front stoop. At a restaurant, that person is coming back 5-6 times if it's a good meal, and they're filling your water, they're bringing you extra. They're hustling at a different level, in my opinion. Now, so that's a bit more of a meritocracy than just kind of the flat 20% everywhere thing. Okay. So now here's the question. What are you doing now? Because I think in post-COVID world, there's, like you said, your oil change, you go to, Grease Monkey and they're asking for a tip. But that's a service. I mean, I don't know, but I've never been asked for a tip there before. Is that tippable?
I mean, is it typical that they're asking?
No, tippable. Like, is
tippable.
Is it a tip? Is it when is the tip worthy and when is it not tip worthy?
I'll answer. I think more nowadays when I see that thing pop up, I don't think there's a time I don't tip no matter what it is now.
Have you never done a zero? You've never done a zero tip?
I've done a zero. Yeah, and mostly that's like if I'm walking up to a counter to just get something, like a gas station or something like that. It's like, to me, that's when I'll do zero. But most of the time now, I give a tip no matter what, but it's usually whatever is on those occasions where it's like an oil change or something like that. It's usually just the lowest one. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm like, okay, I guess everybody's asking for, and I totally understand it. So most of the time I'm like, okay, I'll do the 15 or whatever that is. That's all right.
Karina, what are you guys doing with this, the tipping culture today?
I think because we're still also trying to figure it out. It's like that moment by moment thing. Sometimes it catches you off guard, and my initial reaction is like, why would I tip for this? I've never had a tip before. And so then you kind of, that awkward, like, I don't know what to do. So then I always tip something because I feel like, oh, they're gonna hardcore judge me and like be offended, and then I can never come back here. So I will at least tip something. But then it's like, next time I go there, am I gonna tip or not? You have to process that. And I don't know that I have a clear answer.
Okay.
I know it's like harder because we all feel that money's tighter now. You know, it doesn't go as far as it did, and then now we're like expected to tip even more on top of what we were paying before. So that's a consideration. But also, yeah, I know God calls us to be generous, and it's not ours in the first place. So I think I still kind of go back and forth. It's a tension I haven't resolved yet.
Right.
Well, and obviously there's a bigger question for us as Christians, but like I do, for me, it's like yeah, there is that. It's each instance is different. But for some reason, there is that, like, whether it's guilt or shame or something like that, that comes at you right away when you see that. Or when we were just at drive-through Starbucks the other day, and some of them, if you're paying with a card, they'll hand that little thing out to you and you pay for it, and they'll still hold it while it says like tip and everything. And so it is just that few seconds of like, this is awkward. Like, do I need to like keep pressing more buttons so they know I have so I just think there is something that goes on inside of us that we're like, ooh, well, like Karina said, like, should I tip now, or maybe I'll do it next time? What are they going to think of that? Which is just crazy. But I do think it gets into the bigger question for us as Christians is generosity thing. What should we be doing? How should we be generous with the money that isn't ours?
Right. So, okay. That I think is I think we can argue about this back and forth, kind of like where we land on this, but biblically, how do you think about this? Like how do we think about, yes, the Bible says that, that Christians should be generous. I mean, we could point to a ton of verses about that, being generous. The Bible also says that we should be good stewards, right? So we should not, like, I think some people would probably out of context take the verse that Jesus says about like, give to anyone who asks, and just say, oh, well then if they're asking, you better give. I think that's a loose interpretation of something that Jesus is doing. And by the way, Jesus was not talking about tipping at that point. Okay. So I think that has more to do with generosity to those in need and the poor and things like that. But I don't think there's really a good, clear tipping verse. But I guess the question becomes, in my mind, the biblical precedent that's most compelling around tipping is offering a fair wage to a worker. So in a service industry, for example, that person is working for you. Even if they're being paid by their employer, or maybe if it's a restaurant, they're not being fully paid by their employer. Right. They're actually being paid by you. You are essentially their employer in that moment. What, for good or bad, like some people will say we shouldn't tip any at all. They should just give them a flat rate. And that's how that's actually how it works in other countries. Like in France, there is no tipping. it's offensive to tip in some places
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, what do you think? I'm not making enough money? Like so there are some cultures where tipping is not a thing, and people will argue that, but let's be real. Our culture, it's built into our culture.
Mhm.
So the question becomes, what biblically do you think the Lord would have us do? Like, what's our philosophy or theology of tipping when it comes to making sure that we are giving fair wages to people, making sure that we are being generous, making sure that we are also still stewarding our money well. Like Karina said, we don't have. I didn't get a raise. Y'all didn't get raises. I know that because I'm your boss. Like we're like we ain't getting tipped, right? So like, what does that look like for us?
As you were talking, it just kind of came to my mind, like that this could just snowball and we might eventually become a culture where everything's just tipped. And I was kind of processing what would that look like. And I think it's because we have a cultural expectation to tip that there is kind of a responsibility in that sense. I mean, we don't want to be, I don't think it'd be wise to be a rebel and be like, well, we're just not going to tip because we don't agree with it. But that's just a random thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I think like this, to me, this comes down to, when I think about tipping, it's sort of like a gospel thing. And I know we kind of put this in our notes before, but, like it comes down to whether service is great or whether it's bad. Like if it's bad service, I mean, we all don't deserve God, the grace that he has given us, the love that he has given us. We have our just and fair punishment, but yet he gave us his son for the cross for that payment. And so we don't deserve that, even when our lives, I mean, we're terrible at our jobs, we're terrible at following God. We have been given this like amazing grace that kind of substitutes for that. So I feel like in this sense of like tipping, if we're kind of going, well, service was bad, therefore I'm not going to tip. I mean, it's just that whole thing of like, well, no, it's we like look at us Christians, what we have been given through God. And somebody has a bad day serving or something like that. I feel like as Christians, we should be like, oh no, we're gonna, like, you might not deserve this in your moment of trouble, but we should be generous and giving. I don't know.
Okay. So if you serve food and Kyle Knight comes into your establishment, the moral of the story is really slum it for him and he's going to give you more.
Well, for real, shouldn't we?
I'm just asking the questions here today. I'm like flipping roles here today.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what you guys are thinking on this, but I feel that I feel a very strong compulsion to continue to tip service industry, especially service industry people who I know aren't making a minimum wage hourly wage, because that tipping piece is added into that. Even before COVID, I mean, gosh, we were tipping at Starbucks, right? There's I mean, even before the credit card thing, like there was the tip jar, right? So if somebody's making you a fine, barista's drink or whatever, and you want to throw a couple bucks in, like, okay, cool. Like, go for that. I think that's fair. I think that's fair to tip your barber. I think it's fair. Like when I've been on guided fishing trips, like you tip your guide, like there's service sort of industry where the way that they kind of serve you warrants like, oh, you know what? I want to show appreciation. That's what the tip is for, is kind of showing that appreciation for services rendered above and beyond the agreed upon amount cost. I do think that it's getting out of hand. And as much as I think it's great to be generous, I also don't know that that I can afford to be generous with every single person who asks for a tip. I mean, there's a certain bottom line for those of us who are on fixed incomes, right? Who we don't have an excess of income rolling in our bank account, that like at the gas station, I don't know that I'm going to tip for my Gatorade. at the oil change, I'm not sure I'm going to tip on those things. We're going to the airport. I was at the airport this summer. At the airport, and you buy a magazine at the newsstand, I'm not sure I'm going to tip in that situation, because it's not really like a service rendered. So I don't know. That's and I'm just kind of weighing that out, because I think that Christians should be generous, and I think we should. It is linked to our witness how we treat those who wait on us, who serve us in these service industries. But I do think there's some discernment needed in this.
Yeah, and I think that's true, and I agree with you. I mean, there are things that you just can't swing in your budget. I think it's keeping track of what is socially expected to tip in, and I think that does change, and it will probably change. But when you're tipping in a place where it's expected culturally, like widespread, not like, hey, 5 people think you should do this. It's like become a new cultural norm. I think those are the places I agree that you should tip. I think, it started off in restaurants, and now we're restaurants and your barber, and it has grown over time. So I think to do that. But I think the one thing that kept coming to my mind when I was prepping for this was whether you do it or not, do it in kindness. So I was just reminded of Colossians 3:12. Since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tenderhearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And then jumping down to verse 17, and whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. I'm just knowing that we are his representatives. So, I mean, if we're at the gas station and we're buying a Gatorade and that's it, and I don't think there's an expectation to tip, but you can still be kind, and you're still a representative. If you're at a place to tip generously, do it generously.
Right.
I think that's super important to remember, whether you're all for tipping, or, there are sometimes where somebody will get a bill or something like that, and just whether it's bad service or not, they're super frustrated and they're like, tip, why would I ever tip that? And it's like, we have to remember who we are representing, that we're ambassadors of Christ, and how people see us, how we react to certain things. It's all going to be looked at. And so, I mean, even just that, there's a verse of 1 Corinthians that talks about like God loves a cheerful giver. God loves a cheerful giver. Yes. But it's also like we are representing Christ in whatever our feelings are on service, or a tip or no tip or whatever, that we need to remember that we are Christians, and we're out there in this world, and how we react to certain things is going to be watched.
Yeah. That's good. Tip on, y'all. I mean, again, let's keep it real. This is not like black and white Bible stuff we're talking about today. It's just like, how do we navigate this seemingly weird little piece of our culture with a biblical framework, like with a worldview intact, and to say, yeah, we want to be generous, but we also want to be wise. We want to be discerning, but we also want to be cheerful. Like, we want to have the disposition of those who follow Christ. And so I think thinking about it matters.
Yes.
Thinking about it, and not just pressing 20% and not just defaulting to 0 every single time, but actually turning on our brains, discerning with our minds and our hearts, how would Christ want us to live? I think that's the important part of this conversation.
Yeah. And I think it's, to some people, it might be like, oh, that's just like another thing that's coming up that I have to take time to think about every single time. But it's like, that is the world that we live in. And we really should be, especially as Christians, and how we're following Christ in our day-to-day lives. Like, we should be thinking about these things. So, Hey, thanks for the conversation, guys. Happy New Year.
Go take down your Christmas decorations.
When do you stop saying Happy New Year?
January 2nd.
It's past January 2nd.
Adios.
See you later.